Most serial killer stories allow the audience a simple emotional exit. They present a single individual who is clearly broken, clearly dangerous, and clearly separate from everyone else. Once that person is removed, the story feels complete. This one does not offer that comfort, because the most disturbing element of this case is not the killer himself, but the structure that formed around him and how easily ordinary teenagers became part of it. This is not just a story about murder. It is a story about authority, grooming, and the quiet moment when obedience replaces moral judgment without anyone noticing it has happened. In the early 1970s, Houston was a city expanding faster than its ability to supervise itself. New neighborhoods spread outward, families arrived for industrial work, and large suburban areas developed with minimal oversight. Teenagers moved freely through these spaces, riding bikes for miles, staying out late, socializing largely beyond adult supervision. This was an era before mobile phones, before constant parental tracking, and before the assumption that danger was always present. Authority figures were trusted almost by default. Adults were rarely questioned, and men who appeared calm, reliable, and established were assumed to be safe. This cultural backdrop mattered because it created an environment where warning signs were dismissed and access went unchallenged. Dean Corll did not force his way into this world. He'd fit into it quietly. Dean Corll lived with his mother and helped run a small candy business, supplying sweets to local shops and occasionally giving them away to neighborhood children. He appeared socially reserved, kept a low profile, and did not attract attention in the way overtly aggressive personalities often do. He did not drink heavily in public. He did not fight. He did not display open hostility. To neighbors and acquaintances, he was simply there, an adult presence that blended into the background. This unremarkable appearance gave him something invaluable. It gave him trust without effort. Teenagers saw him as an older man with privacy, resources, and tolerance. Parents saw him as a quiet adult who caused no problems. No one saw him as a threat, and because of that, no one felt the need to look closer. Dean Corll's crimes did not begin with violence. They began with access and influence. He offered teenage boys alcohol, drugs, money, and a place to gather without rules. He listened to them. He validated their frustrations, presented himself as someone who understood them better than parents or teachers did. This was not accidental. It was deliberate. For adolescents navigating identity, independence, and insecurity, that attention carried enormous weight. Corll slowly positioned himself as an authority figure, not by demanding obedience, but by rewarding it. Over time, he created dependency, making himself central to their social world. This is how grooming operates in practice. It does not announce itself. It embeds itself gradually until resistance feels unnecessary and questioning feels inappropriate. What separates this case from most serial killer narratives is the role played by David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, both teenagers who became active participants in the crimes. They were not coerced in a single moment. They were drawn in through a process that blended fear, reward, obligation, and psychological manipulation. Corll reframed violence as necessity and obedience as loyalty. He introduced the idea that certain people deserved punishment and that helping him was not only acceptable, but required. Once this framework was established, responsibilities shifted away from personal conscience and toward compliance with authority. This shift is subtle, but devastating. When authority defines morality, actions are no longer evaluated internally. They are judged by whether they satisfy expectations imposed from above. As participation continued, the acts themselves became routine. Victims were lured under the promise of social gatherings, alcohol, or parties. Once inside Corll's home, they were restrained, assaulted, and killed. The process was controlled and repeated, not impulsive or chaotic. Bodies were transported and buried in remote locations, including a boat shed that later became synonymous with the case. The number of victims is believed to be at least 28, though investigators have long suspected the true figure may be higher. What matters most is not the precise number. It is the structure that allowed the killings to continue. This was not secrecy alone. It was organization, obedience, and repetition. The murders did not continue because people were unaware. They continued because no one challenged the authority that had been established. The accomplices believed resistance meant punishment or death. Over time, violence became procedural. something done because it was expected, not because it was chosen. This pattern mirrors what is seen in abusive institutions, cults, and authoritarian systems. When power is centralized and dissent is punished, moral responsibility dissolves. People stop asking whether something is wrong and begin focusing on whether they are performing correctly. The killings did not end through investigation or intervention. They ended when Elmer Wayne Henley finally broke the structure of obedience by killing Dean Corll during an argument. Once authority collapsed, the system fell apart immediately. Without a central figure dictating behavior, the participants were forced to confront what they had done. Only then did the scale of the crimes become visible. Houston struggled to process the reality of the case. Public discussion focused heavily on Corll as a singular monster because that framing allowed emotional distance. What received less attention was the uncomfortable truth that teenagers had been shaped into instruments of violence through grooming, reward, and obedience. This discomfort is understandable. It forces society to confront how easily authority can override moral judgment, especially in young, vulnerable individuals. What this story shows us about human behavior is not that violence is rare or monstrous, but that it is often administrative. It emerges through systems, hierarchies, and compliance rather than impulse. People do not need to enjoy harm to participate in it. They need justification, structure, and the removal of personal responsibility. Dean Corll did not simply kill. He built a system where others carried out his will because authority had replaced conscience. That is what makes this case so disturbing. It does not allow us to say only one man was responsible. It asks us to examine how obedience, grooming, and power imbalance can reshape behavior in ways most people believe they are immune to. This story does not ask whether you would become a killer. It asks under what conditions you might stop questioning orders, and how long it would take before that silence became routine. That question should not be answered quickly. Thanks for watching. Stay curious.